Alanna, so good to see you. Thanks for coming on. You look so tan. Have you been out? Have you been outside? You're always outside,
I am
right?
always outside, yeah. I work in the sun. I work on the beach. Yeah, it's a good
Well, it
place
looks
to be.
great.
Thanks.
I think last time I saw you was when I was visiting the seaweed farm.
Yes.
And that was for Winter Waters. So
It was
I
for
want
Winter
you to tell everybody about Winter Waters. But before we get there, what have you been doing this summer? Like, what have you been foraging? You're always like out there in the water. And I love the fact that you're always teaching people. I follow you on Instagram and I always learn something new.
Yeah, summer is a busy time. I'm doing a lot of foraging. I'm doing a lot of seaweed farming. We ramp up our seaweed production right now, but the tides are really good in the summer. So taking a lot of people out into the intertidal to forage shellfish and forage seaweed is really the biggest.
Let's talk about this seaweed farming because this is getting a lot of buzz and it's really innovative. I remember the first time I heard about it, it just seemed like this magical food source that we should all be eating. I grew up Korean, and so we've been eating seaweed way before way before it was cool, really. I have some funny stories which I'll share about seaweed. But tell everybody like what the process is and like why it's so exciting.
Yeah, it's definitely starting to ramp up in the United States, and we are late to the party. There's been, the rest of the world has been farming and eating seaweed for far longer than we have. But it is ramping up because of the sustainability and the nutrition behind it. It's one of the healthiest foods on the planet. It grows really fast and without very many inputs. There's no fertilizers, no pesticides. And there's different ways that it can be done. In Oregon right now, we're farming Pacific dulse, and we're doing it on land in big tanks. So essentially we just pump in water from the bay, it circulates through the tanks, and then right back into the bay. But a lot of seaweed and kelp farming that's going on happens in the actual water. So you lay lines out, you seed those lines, and then you grow kelp throughout the season.
For those non-kelp eaters, non-seaweed eaters, tell everybody how nutritious it is and why we should all be eating more seaweed.
It varies a little bit, seaweed to seaweed and kelp to kelp.
Right.
But all seaweeds share similar nutrients. They just vary in the amounts. The seaweed that we grow, Pacific dulse, is very high in protein. It's about 30 to 40% protein. All seaweeds have iodine, potassium, fiber, omega-3s, literally like every vitamin you can think of. They're super nutritious and they're extremely versatile, but they're not things that we in our culture have necessarily grown up eating or learning how to eat.
Right.
So it takes a little bit of education, a little bit of encouragement of how to get seaweed on your plate in an easy way.
Well, you, with the Winter Waters, have done such a good job of getting people to eat and try seaweed in different ways. I remember I was in Cannon Beach, and I received some candy from, I think, Bruce's Candy, and it was like toffee that had dulse seaweed in it. It was delicious. And I also had bread. We had bread that was baked into it, like a focaccia. Yum, yum. But I think also the way people think of it, because they think of it maybe in the kind of the wet noodle kind of stage, but it's oftentimes dried or freeze dried or powdered. I mean, and then you guys with Oregon seaweed sell it different ways, right?
We do, yeah. And one of the benefits of Pacific dulse is that it's actually an intertidal seaweed, so it's used to being exposed to air for long periods of time in the wild, and so that makes it has a pretty long shelf life when taken out of the water. You can keep it refrigerated for up to 7 to 10 days.
Right.
Whereas a lot of kelps that are on the market have to be dried or frozen or processed somehow because they don't really have that shelf life. So it allows us that versatility to sell it and make it available both fresh and dried.
I think of all those people taking those protein powders, and everyone these days is like lifting weights in this protein powder, trying to get as much protein.
Seaweed.
Right, just eat seaweed. Like, how many chicken breasts can one person eat, right? I don't know, but I mean, you can have a whole lot of seaweed. Yeah, I mean, I grew up on the Oregon coast, and my cultural background is Korean, and we've always eaten a lot of seaweed. And when my family came here, I tell the story that we were foraging way before foraging was cool. My father and brother would go out into the ocean. They go fishing, and the whole day, fishing and crabbing. And my mom, my sister, and our job was to forage. And so a lot of what we foraged was seaweed, different types. So there'd be like the long kelp, like the thing that you had to rope in, right?
I didn't know this about it.
Oh yeah, and then the stuff on the rocks we'd have to cut off, and then we'd go back, we wash it, and they would dry it. And at this point, I was at the beach. I did all this stuff, whatever. I'd go to school the next, Monday morning. I come home, get off the school bus, and I would see my house covered in seaweed. So they would put it on our roof. Can you imagine? I live in the suburbs. Like, I live in the suburbs, suburban house, and our house is like something that came out of like the Muppets movie. Like, it's covered in all this seaweed on the roof, and it's hanging down. I mean, what must our neighbors think? And they would dry it, and then they would bundle it up in these little tight bundles, and they would ship it off to Korea.
Oh,
the same seaweed that they would eat in Korea, but they said the water was so much more pure and like less polluted here. They thought anyway, and they would ship it back to Korea. Wow. And then for the rest of the year, we'd rehydrate the seaweed, eat like seaweed soup and things like that. But I mean, I think of those moments as like a pivotal point in my childhood. Like, talk about parents embarrassing their children. If you imagine your house being covered in seaweed. And to the credit of my neighbors, like, no one ever said like, you crazy people, like, what are you doing? Like, everyone just kind of,
impressive. That is like my apartment. I hang seaweed from clothes hangers all around my windows, and my whole apartment will smell like low tide for like 2 days. And my friends, they do say stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They come in and they're like,
I just think it truly is like a miracle. I mean, I was talking to Chuck, Chuck at Oregon Seaweed, and he was saying that if when treated, depending on how you're cooking it or whatever, he says it can taste just like bacon. And he was so excited to tell me that it tastes like bacon.
Have you heard about the seaweed that tastes like bacon?
Bacon flavored seaweed.
This is the big claim. Yeah, it was Vitaly Paley who, was a big time Portland chef, and he was one of the first people to be utilizing the seaweed from our farm, and he deep fried it, and he came back to Chuck and to all of us, and he was like, I got it to taste like bacon. And of course, worldwide, the funny part about this is it was when I was still studying at OSU. I had nothing to do with the seaweed.
Right.
But it was being grown at the lab that I lived at, essentially. And these press releases went worldwide about this bacon-flavored seaweed.
Yes.
And both my parents were chefs. I grew up in a family of restaurant owners, and my dad, who had a restaurant in New York City, heard about it and was like, what is this bacon seaweed that your school's growing? And at that time, I was like, I have nothing to do with the bacon seaweed. Don't ask me about it. And
because Oregon seaweed started at OSU as almost like a class project, right?
So they've been cultivating Pacific dulse for about 30 to 40 years at OSU, and it was initially as a food source for the urchins and the abalone that they were studying. And Chuck saw it and saw the potential of it to be grown on a larger commercial scale. And
I'm excited when I see people wearing like the kale shirts and stuff like that, or whatever, or eat more. I always feel like it should be seaweed.
We do need.
We're like the next revolution. Get people excited about it. Yes. I think I was with you. We were tasting like seaweed snacks or like seaweed in different forms and stuff like that. And we're also talking about critters in the seaweed too, because like, is it vegan? You're like, it is vegan. But there could be a critter in there, meaning like tiny, tiny crabs, right?
Tiny little crustaceans, and that's the same with vegetables, right? So like broccoli has aphids on it sometimes, and yes, of course the broccoli is still vegan if you're not eating.
People don't want to hear this.
No, people don't want to hear it, and people are very disconnected nowadays to where their food is coming from. Right. So yes, when you get food in the grocery store, it's often already cleaned or processed in a way it's not going to have. There's still bugs in it.
It's okay.
But something about it being from the ocean and being something that people don't know that much about, they are a little bit, I will say the crustaceans make them a little bit more nervous than aphids, which crustaceans are also an allergy. So we do have to put it on labels for that reason, but...
Well, I'm excited. I feel like there's this movement happening, and the fact that it's so sustainable is another wonderful thing. I mean, everyone's trying to do better by the planet, And so I think your educational part of it is a big part that I like so much, especially when you're doing your foraging. Are you doing any more foraging trips for people? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, we do them. I do them all summer. So right now, scheduling out July and August, but when we have really low tides and good weather all summer, I take people out foraging for shellfish and seaweed quite a bit. The seaweed season did just end, so in Oregon we have a pretty limited foraging season for seaweed that's March to mid-June, and so same thing as your family. I'm out there harvesting in that period of time and drying it and stockpiling it for the rest of the year, because after June 15th I can't get it anymore.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And then as far as ocean, like seaweed, but how seafood goes, like how, I mean, I know you did a lot of work. Like I used to work with Leaf Gildersleeve at Flying
Oh, cool,
Fish,
yeah.
and you would do a lot of education and do partnerships with that. And we're all trying to eat better seafood because everyone thinks the ocean is so big and there's an abundance. Like the fish is so plentiful, it's going to be there forever. But we really have to make smarter choices, even with the seafood that we're eating, right?
Yeah, we really do. My whole background is marine science and marine science education specifically, and it wasn't necessarily focused on food until I started working with seaweed and learning a ton about food systems and what goes into getting seafood or seaweed from the ocean to your plate, and kind of seeing what is wrong with our current system. And I think, everybody asks, what to do in facing climate change and what can people take action on. And food, your decisions around food are huge, and seafood specifically. But the Oregon coast, especially, it is actually hard to find local Oregon seafood on the Oregon coast.
That's true.
Yeah.
And why is that? Is it all shipped to China?
Yeah,
or Asia?
it's a big infrastructure issue. There's not a lot of distribution and cold storage that's available at price points that small producers can hit. There's definitely a lot of work being done to change this. That is a big mission of ours with Winter Waters, but it's essentially cheaper for big restaurants to be buying stuff from big distributors, who are getting stuff from overseas or out of state lines. So I think the stat is that 90% of seafood sold on the Oregon coast is imported. Yeah. And we export 90% of the seafood we catch.
Just imagine if we actually, caught it and then utilized it here. Wouldn't have no shipping costs, none of that stuff. Yeah.
And a smaller carbon footprint.
Absolutely.
The food to your plate.
Well, tell us a little bit about Winter Waters. I got to experience a bunch of events this last season, and I think it's so great. You guys do so many cool events, and then I find out that it's just like 2 people or three of you, right? Like
people.
It seems like an army of people behind this operation.
Yeah, it is an army of people considering we work with amazing chefs and restaurant partners throughout the state. But Winter Waters essentially started with us wanting to do one seaweed-focused dinner. Rochelle and I, Rochelle works for Blue Evolution, I work for Oregon Seaweed, got together and said, let's put on one seaweed dinner. And all of a sudden, within a month, it was like 15 seaweed dinners with all the connections that we had. And the first year was smaller, but last year, we're trying to give seaweed a platform. So in the month of February, which we focus on February to try to bring business to restaurants in the off season, there's a lot of small missions within the big mission.
I love how you're going to give seaweed a platform because we all talk. There was like a Saturday Night Live clip where they talk about how the vegetables, like it's like a council and everyone's petitioning and our poor alfalfa sprout has not been getting good representation since the 80s, and then obviously broccoli. Like Brussels sprouts, really, they had a team of people behind them because now everyone loves Brussels sprouts when they used to be like the bane of everyone's existence. And now cauliflower is having its shining moment, right?
But see, we need seaweed to have that shining moment.
Seaweed's still in the back, and somebody needs to put some money behind seaweed and get them out in the forefront, put them on the red carpet.
We need Beyonce to wear a seaweed sweatshirt, and everybody will go crazy. Right. But the mission of Winter Waters is any restaurant that we work with can be involved. The only thing that we ask is if they're doing a pre-feed dinner, every course has to have seaweed in it in some capacity. If they have a menu special, it has to have seaweed in it. Outside of that, we ideally want people to be using local Oregon seafood. That's another mission and focus of it. But the biggest thing, Dungeness crab, rockfish, all these other fish on our coast, they've had a platform. People know they exist. They know how to use them. They know how to eat them. But utilizing seaweed in all these different ways is really the key. And this is where the seaweed candy you're talking about came from.
Yes.
Never would I have thought to go after the candy store in terms of using seaweed, but when you get
they have seaweed candy in Asia. They put the seaweed on anything. It's sweet, savory, candied, crunchy, all textures and stuff.
Yeah. When you think about it, it's, there's sea salt chocolate out there on the market everywhere. Seaweed's the same thing.
I had a beautiful cocktail, and it had a floating, the dulse in it. It was beautiful, and it was undulating through. It was like watching the waves, the ocean. But I think seeing chefs get really creative with it is really fun because they're not necessarily seafood restaurants that are doing this.
Yeah, I think that was one of my favorite parts of last year is that we had a lot of menu specials and dinners that went on that were not seafood based, and they still utilize seaweed in a way that you might not even know it was seaweed. When it's deep fried, you really might not even
it tastes like bacon.
tell. Yeah.
Tastes like bacon. I love that. Well, and then you said you come from a family that loves to cook, so you must be surrounded. You grew up surrounded by good food. Like, what did your family make when you were growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I think I took it for granted being raised by two chefs, but both my parents were chefs. They met at the Culinary Institute of America.
Did they?
And worked in the World Trade Center in New York. And
that's amazing.
My brother,
two chefs.
Yeah, two chefs.
Double
my
chef.
dad owned a restaurant on the Upper West Side of Manhattan for 10 years, and my mom now edits food training videos, so is not actively cooking. But I definitely was raised in a family of foodies,
right?
And never thought I would be working in the world of food. I think I escaped it on purpose.
Did you learn how to cook, or they just shoo all the children out of the kitchen?
I didn't. I don't have any professional training as a cook, but I definitely learned how to cook, and I just had a huge appreciation for cooking, so I cook at home 3 meals a day, every day.
Well, that's great to hear. I mean, I think people, when you're around people who cook, you learn a lot just through observation, right? You see what they do, you learn kind of like best practices and stuff like that. My kids, I try to get them they like to bake, but they're not actively cooking, but we cook together. They're really good at cracking eggs. That's one thing. Like, anytime there's an egg to be cracked in the house, they insist that I go, eggs. Who wants to crack some eggs? And they're like, no matter what they're doing in the house, they drop and they like want. So now they're trying to perfect like the one-handed double crack, the crack, this kind of thing. But they see it as like a dexterity skill that they want to like master. But I think it's really great when children are exposed to good foods. I'm sure you were exposed to lots of different flavors and textures because I think people who cook tend to cook the things that they like, and it's not always, you're not just going to cook what the kids like, you're going to cook what they want to eat.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, my dad was from France, so we ate a lot of weird things that I never would have thought I would be eating as a kid. We grew up eating like rabbit, and the family fighting over who got to eat the eyeballs.
My gosh.
And his restaurant was a big farm to table, and using his dad was a butcher, and so he would get the butcher into his restaurant, and they would use every single part of the animal. And again, as a kid, I really looked right past that, but now I'm right back in the food systems world of realizing this was a big deal.
When I was in Korea, I went to visit Korea for the first time right before the pandemic shut down, and we were at a seafood focused restaurant, and we had this famous soup, and they have the head of the fish.
Yes.
And everyone gets a head. I was like, how many heads are there? But everyone gets a head in their bowl of soup, and there's an eyeball, and you're supposed to suck the eyeball out of the head, and that's for good luck. And I was like, I don't know if I need that much good luck, but But I heard that you're thinking about going to visit Korea.
I am thinking about visiting Korea. Yeah, I might go in March. We'll see what happens.
Oh, that would be amazing. The seafood there was so fresh. I think you would really appreciate it. And if you get a chance, I did not get a chance to go the last time I was there, but Jeju Island is like known for their seafood.
Yeah, that's really where I want to go. I just read a book called The Island of Sea Women, and it's all about the women divers. who grow up learning how to harvest seafood like that. And I was just in Chile, and we had we were on Chiloé Island, and similar, they had such wild seafood I'd never seen, I'd never thought to eat, and it was just very cool to see a different seafood culture.
Yeah, I think around the world too. I mean, I think maybe, I don't know, does the United States feel like it eats less seafood than other countries, or is it just because we're so big and only parts of us are surrounded by the ocean?
That could be, but even people on the coast that I know have lived on the coast forever don't eat all the clam species. Like they don't know about all the clams that you can find in the bay and how to harvest them. And so, I do think you might be right.
Yeah. I mean, when my family first immigrated to the United States, we moved to Colorado Springs, of all places. And as soon as my father realized that we were completely landlocked, within a year, he decided that we were moving. And we were moving to, the reason why Oregon is he just looked on a giant map and saw California, recognized California, said, oh, I think it's crowded in California. Let's go one state up. So that's how we ended up in Oregon.
Nice. Good decision.
And then my childhood consists of they would wake the children up, not even wake them up. They would lift them from their bed and put them in the car. This was before seatbelts, right? Okay. So I would wake up sleeping, and then I'd wake up on the Oregon coast, and we would harvest sand shrimp for bait.
Yes,
So they would get
amazing.
sand shrimp for bait, and then the sun would be coming up, and so that they would use that to catch whatever the limit was in everything, like all the fish. But that was my memory of, you know, and I didn't have seafood. I never bought any seafood until I was an adult, like out of college, because in college you eat dorm food or whatever.
Yeah.
But until I was like in my 20s, graduated from college and cooking, did I ever buy seafood. And I remember being shocked at the price of a Dungeness crab.
Oh, yeah.
Because as far as I can, Dungeness crab is free in my world.
Yeah.
And suddenly they're asking for like $20 a pound or something like that. And I was like, who pays for this thing?
A lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes work. It takes effort to go find it. And I think teaching about foraging, I have come to learn that people are slightly intimidated by seafood. And I think that's, because you hear like there's ways to process and care for your seafood when you have it at home. And
a lot of people don't know how to cook it. They're always afraid they're going to overcook their fish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think is where the education piece comes in. And that was when I started selling seaweed, I had this huge question of like, how the heck did I become a seaweed salesperson?
You're like a seaweed ambassador.
Yes,
truly.
but I mean, I'm doing a lot of sales and marketing work, which are not in my background at all. And I realized it's all education.
Right.
Nobody knows how to cook with seaweed.
No.
So I was teaching chefs. Like it became me going door to door from restaurant to restaurant on the coast and in Portland. And chefs know how to cook most food, but I might know how to cook seaweed
better,
more
right,
than a lot of chefs do.
Well, you've got it hanging up in your house, so you're like one with the seaweed. So
I cook it a lot.
Oh my gosh! So, what is the next step for Oregon seaweed? Like, what do you think is it gonna continue to grow? I mean, I think of this as like, talk about a nutritional supplement that is so sustainable. I mean, when I was there visiting, I remember you were telling us that it pretty much like it just. You just let it go and it just keeps growing. It regenerates itself.
Yeah,
right?
and that's Pacific dulse. Kelp does not do that. Kelp has spores and it's an annual, where Pacific dulse just clones itself. So you're right. We give it fresh seawater. It needs sunlight and seawater. That's pretty much it. There's no pesticides, no herbicides, no freshwater input to our whole farm, and it clones itself, so we don't have to seed anything. It does feel like something that, besides us checking up on our system and making sure that everything is operating correctly, it is repropagating itself constantly.
It does seem like a miracle food. I feel like when we go to Mars, we'll be taking dulse seaweed
dried
with us.
Seaweed, right? For sure.
Dried seaweed. We'd be like, putting it in all our smoothies and everything like that. But.
And I think that's the future of it is getting it into value-added products and getting it onto people's plates in easier ways for people to visualize eating seaweed. There's like one seaweed on the market right now, and it's nori sheets, And, and people either know of seaweed salad or they know of nori sheets, and those are the only two uses of seaweed that people in our culture know.
Right.
And so diversifying that is really important.
Well, just the nori is great because, we think about, I've been eating that kind of roasted seaweed my whole life, as every kid, Asian kid, when, it's like our macaroni and cheese, when you just eat rice and nori. You don't even need anything. I grew up eating that. And now, my kids went to Montessori school and they gave that to kids as a snack. Yeah. So rather than crackers or whatever, all these little white kids were eating like nori sheets. And I was like, and they were like nothing. Like they're so used to that. So me, from Asian perspective, that's a huge amount of pride to see it's like one of our food items become such a staple in, contemporary American culture.
Yeah. And it's huge for the whole seaweed industry for kids to be at least exposed to it in that way, because I can ask, we have a lot of school groups that come to our farm, and I can ask kids if they know if they eat seaweed, and half the students will raise their hand and say, I love seaweed.
Yeah, I know.
And some kids don't like it, and to be fair, I am not the biggest nori fan.
Right.
But my educational point of this constantly is that every seaweed has a different flavor.
Right.
They have different ways to use them. Yes, you can dry them and make them crunchy like a nori sheet, but nori grows all over our coastline, and you can eat it fresh. You can put it in salads. You can pan fry it. I love it in those ways. I'm not even a fan of dried dulse, to be honest. Just dried seaweed is a little too powerful for me. But putting it into things, using it as an ingredient, is you're never just going to eat a bowl of seaweed that has nothing on it, right? You're going to dress it up. You're going to make something out of it.
Very proudly say that my son's favorite food. Well, I don't know if it's favorite food, but he has gone on record. It's on video because he was on a podcast type situation, and they asked him what his favorite food was, and he said seaweed soup.
Love that.
And there's a Korean soup called miyeokguk,
Okay.
and it's in our house we call it birthday soup because you eat it on your birthday.
Oh.
So in traditional Korean custom, there's like a seaweed soup. It's a brothy, and sometimes there's beef, sometimes there's seafood or clams in there. But he has it just the soup. And I don't know how to make it. I mean, it's not hard, but I just don't make it. So I put in an order with my mom, who lives very close to me. Says, Mom, Lucas would like more seaweed soup, which makes her so happy,
Oh, I'm
right?
sure.
So she makes it, and she like drops it off and stuff like that. And so it's for me very easy. And he likes to have it for breakfast, which is so much easier than making every other American style breakfast. I just heat up the soup, he eats it with rice. He's very happy. It's very nutritious, but it's called birthday soup. And the tradition is you eat it. After you have a baby, you pretty much eat that soup for a month after you give birth, because you're replenishing all these things that your body lost in childbirth, and you're getting that back. So you eat this soup. You eat other things too. It's not the only thing that you eat, but you eat the seaweed soup for about a month after you give birth. And so on your birthday, you have the soup to honor the sacrifice that your mother made. So I tell my son that. I said, you love the soup because by eating this soup, you're honoring me, who birthed you, who pushed you out of my body, who you got all my nutrients and now I need them back. So yes, that's birthday soup.
I love that. I want birthday soup.
Yes. And so on your birthday, most Korean people, if you see, at some point during their day, during their birthday celebrations, they will go and they'll have miyeokguk in a restaurant. But if you haven't had it, look for it on the Korean menu.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's not as flashy as Korean barbecue, all that kind of stuff.
Of
It's just a soup, but it does come with a nice little history. But Alanna, I hope you do get a chance to go to Korea.
I hope so too.
I imagine you doing some free dives with the women out there. I can just see it now. Somebody invite Alanna to go dive at Jeju Island.
I would love to get in the water at some point. Yeah.
Well, keep up the education. Thank you for keeping us all up to date on sustainability on the Oregon coast, and we look forward to more winter waters adventures.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for supporting it all.